laws beyond these. The Scythe commandments: thou shalt kill. Thou shalt kill with no bias, bigotry, or malice afterthought. Thou shalt grant an annum of immunity to the beloved of those who accept your coming, and to anyone else you deem worthy. Thou shalt kill the beloved of those who resist. Thou shalt serve humanity for the full span of thy days, and thy family shall have immunity as recompense for as long as you live. Thou shalt lead an exemplary life in word and deed, and keep a journal of each and every day. Thou shalt kill no scythe beyond thyself. Thou shalt claim no earthly possessions save thy robes, ring, and journal. Thou shalt have neither spouse nor spawn. Thou shalt be beholden to no laws beyond these. Once a year I fast and ponder the commandments. In truth I ponder them daily, but once a year I allow them to be my sole sustenance. There is genius in their simplicity. Before the thunderhead, governments had constitutions and massive tomes of laws, yet even then they were forever debated and challenged and manipulated. Wars were fought over the different interpretations of the same doctrine. When I was much more naive, I thought the simplicity of the Scythe commandments made them impervious to scrutiny. From what angle you approached them, they looked the same. Over my many years, I've been both bemused and horrified by how malleable and elastic they can be. The things we scythes attempt to justify, the things that we excuse. In my early days, there were several scythes still alive who were present when the commandments were formed. Now none remained, all having invoked commandment number 7. I wish I would have asked them how the commandments came about. What led to each one? How did they decide upon the wording? Were there any that were jettisoned before the final 10 were written in stone? And why number 10? Of all the commandments, number 10 gives me the greatest pause for thought, for to put oneself above other laws is a fundamental recipe for disaster. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie. Chapter 6, An Elegy of Scythes. The flight was on time as usual. While weather couldn't entirely be controlled, it was easily diverted away from airports and out of flight paths. Most airlines boasted 99.9% on-time service. It was a full flight, but with the lavishly appointed seats of modern air travel, it didn't feel crowded at all. These days, flying was as comfortable as sitting in one's own living room with the added perk of live entertainment. String quartets and vocal stylists soared through the skies with a cabin full of contented passengers. Air travel these days was far more civilized than in the age of mortality. It was now an exceptionally pleasant way to reach one's destination. Today, however, the passengers of Big Sky Air Flight 922 were on their way to a different destination than the one on which they had planned. The businessman was seated comfortably in seat 15C, an aisle seat. He always requested that seat, not out of superstition, but out of habit. When he didn't get 15C, he was cranky and resentful of whoever did. The company he ran, which was developing hibernation technology, would someday make the longest journeys seem to pass in a matter of minutes. But for now, he would be happy with Big Sky Air as long as he got seat 15C. People were still filing on, taking their seats. He eyed the passengers moving down the aisle with mild disinterest, but only to make sure they didn't hit his shoulder with their purses and carry-ons as they passed. "Are you heading out or heading home?" asked the woman sitting beside him in 15A. There was no 15B. The concept of the B seat, where one had to sit between two other passengers, had been eliminated, along with other unpleasant things, like disease and government. Out, he told her. "And you?" "Home," she told him, with a heavy but relieved sigh. At 5 minutes to departure, a commotion up front caught his attention. A scythe had entered the plane and was talking to a flight attendant. When a scythe wants to travel, any seat is fair game. The scythe could displace a passenger, forcing them to take a different seat or even a different flight if there were no other available seats. More unnerving, however, were tales of scythes who gleaned the passenger from the seat they took. The businessman could only hope that this particular scythe didn't have his sights set on 15C. The scythe's robe was unusual, royal blue, speckled with glittering jewels that appeared to be diamonds, rather ostentatious for a scythe. The businessman didn't know what to make of it. The age of scythe presented was late 30s, although that meant nothing. No one looked their true age anymore. He could have been anywhere from 30-something to 200-something. His hair was dark and well-groomed. His eyes were invasive. The businessman tried not to catch his gaze as the scythe looked down the aisle into the cabin. Then 3 more scythes appeared before the first. They were younger, perhaps in their early 20s. Their robes, each in a different bright color, were also decorated with gems. There was a dark-haired woman in apple green speckled with emeralds, a man in orange speckled with rubies, and another man in yellow speckled with golden citrines. What was the collective word for a group of scythes? An elegy, wasn't it? Odd that there'd be a word for something so rare. In his experience, scythes were always solitary, never traveling together. A flight attendant greeted the Elegy of Scythes, and then the second they were past her, she turned, left the plane, and ran down the jetway. She's escaping, thought the businessman, but then he banished the thought. She couldn't be. She was probably just hurrying to let the gate agent know of the added passengers, that's all. She couldn't be panicking. Flight attendants were trained not to panic. But then the remaining flight attendant closed the door, and the look on her face was anything but reassuring. The passengers began talking to one another, mumbling a little bit of nervous laughter. Yeah, you got it. Let's see. Then the lead scythe addressed the passengers. "Your attention, please," he said with an unnerving smile. "I regret to inform you that the entire flight has been selected for gleaning." The businessman heard it, but his brain told him that he could not have possibly heard correctly, or maybe this was scythe humor if such a thing even existed. The entire flight has been selected for gleaning? That couldn't be possible. It couldn't be allowed, could it? In a few moments, passengers began to wrap their minds around what the scythe had said. Then came the gasps, the wails, the whimpers, and finally uncontrolled sobs. The misery could not have been worse had they lost an engine in flight, as planes did back in the mortal days when technology occasionally failed. The businessman was a quick study and excelled at split-second decisions in a crisis. He knew what he had to do. Perhaps others were thinking the same thing, but he was the one who took action first. He left his seat and hurled himself down the aisle toward the back of the plane. Others followed him, but he was first to the back door. He quickly scanned its operation, then pulled the red lever and swung the door open into a bright sunny morning. A jump from this height to the tarmac might have broken a bone or twisted an ankle, but the healing nanites in his blood would quickly release opiates and deaden the pain. He'd be able to escape in spite of any injury. But before he could leap, he heard the lead scythe say, "I suggest you all return to your seats if you value the lives of your loved ones." It was standard procedure for scythes to glean the families of those who resist or run from being gleaned. Familial gleaning was a remarkable deterrent, but this was a full plane. If he jumped and ran, how would they know who he was? As if reading his mind, the lead scythe said, "We have the manifest from this plane. We know the names of everyone on board, including the names of the flight attendant who displayed cowardice unbecoming to her position and left. Her entire family will pay the price along with her." The businessman slid down to his knees and put his head in his hands. A man behind him pushed past and jumped away. He hit the ground and ran, more worried by what was happening in the moment than what might happen tomorrow. Perhaps he had no family he cared about, or perhaps he'd rather they journeyed with him into oblivion. But as for the businessman, he could not bear the thought of his wife and children being gleaned because of him. Gleaning is necessary, he told himself. Everyone knows, everyone has agreed that this is a crucial necessity. Who was he to go against it? It only seemed terrible now that he was the one lined up against the cold crosshairs of death. Then the lead scythe raised an arm and pointed at him. His fingernails seemed just the slightest bit too long. "You," he said, "the bold one, come here." Others in the aisle stepped aside, and the businessman found himself moving forward. He couldn't even feel his legs doing it. It was as if the scythe was pulling him with an invisible string. His presence was that commanding. "We should glean him first," said the blond, brutish scythe in a bright orange robe wielding what appeared to be a flame-thrower. "Glean him first to set an example." But the lead scythe shook his head. "First of all, put that thing away. We will not play with fire on a plane. Secondly, setting an example presupposes that someone will be left to learn from it. It's pointless when there's no one to set an example for." He lowered his weapon and looked down, chastised. The other two scythes remained silent. "You were so quick to leave your seat," the lead scythe said to the businessman. "Clearly you're the alpha of this plane, and an alpha I will allow you to choose the order in which these good folks should be gleaned. You can be gleaned last if you choose, but first you must select the order of the others. Come now, no indecisiveness. You were decisive enough when you ran to the back of the plane. Bring that formidable will to bear on this moment." Clearly the scythe was enjoying this. He shouldn't enjoy it. That's one of the basic precepts of scythedom. A random part of his mind thought, "I should lodge a complaint," which he realized would be very difficult to do if he was dead. He looked to the terrified people around him. Now they were terrified of him. He was the enemy too now. "We are waiting," said the woman in green, impatient to begin. "How?" the man asked, trying to control his breathing, stalling for time. "How will you glean us?" The lead scythe pulled back a fold of his robe to display an entire collection of weapons neatly concealed beneath, knives of various lengths, guns, other objects that the man didn't even recognize. "Our method will be as our mood suits us, sans incendiary devices, of course. Now please start choosing people so we may begin." The female scythe tightened her grip on the handle of a machete and brushed back her dark hair with her free hand. Did she actually lick her lips? This would not be a gleaning, it would be a bloodbath, and the businessman realized he wanted no part of it. Yes, his fate was sealed, nothing could change that, which meant he didn't have to play the scythe's twisted game. Suddenly he found himself sublimating his fear, rising to a place where he could look the scythe in his dark eyes, the same deep shade of blue as his robe. "No," the man said, "I will not choose, and I will not give you the pleasure of watching me squirm." Then he turned to the other passengers. "I advise everyone here to end your own lives before these scythes get their hands on you. They take too much pleasure in it. They don't deserve their rank any more than they deserve the honor of gleaning you." The lead scythe stared at him, but only for a moment. Then he turned to his other three compatriots. "Begin," he ordered. The others drew weapons and began the awful gleaning. "I am your completion," the lead scythe said loudly to the dying. "I am the last word of your lives well lived. Give thanks, and thus farewell." The lead scythe pulled down his own blade, but the businessman was ready. The moment the blade was drawn, the businessman thrust himself forward onto it. A final, willful act, making death his choice rather than the scythe's, denying the scythe, if not his method, then his madness.